Hello, it's Anthony Chadwick from the Webinar Vet. So pleased to have one of my gurus on, somebody I look up to in the whole area of sustainability. It's Sean McCormack, who has had a very varied career, which I'm sure you're going to share with us, Sean. But I have to tell everybody my slightly embarrassing story to start off with, which was myself and Robin Hargreaves went in early March up into the dunes in Sefton, and we were very pleased with ourselves to see all these toads mating with each other, and of course thought they were natterjacks. And you quite rightly, when I showed you the photograph, pointed out that these were a bit too early and they were common toads. So you're a guru. You know your toads, you know your reptiles, you know your birds and everything. You're just a Renaissance man, aren't you?
I'm a bit of a toad nerd now, Anthony. So you caught the right thing there. Yeah, no, just a bit of a nature nerd in general. I think all my life to varying degrees, but yeah, I like the small little detail stuff.
I think I'm the same as you, and it's really interesting. Before we sort of go too much into your background, Um, I'm writing a bit now for various magazines, and the way that everything's connected. The number of people who are asking me to write an article on how nature benefits mental health, for example, and all these sort of things. So everything is connected, and it's just why it's so important. I know we talk about sustainability a lot, but it's sustainability not only in the planet, but it's also for the people and the animals. If we don't get the planet right, it's not great for anybody's mental health, is it? If we're seeing a denuded planet, all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I did another podcast recently, actually, and I was asked, what is it about nature and the natural world that like fascinates you or that you find most kind of interesting? And for me, it is that thing of everything being completely connected and joined up. Like you can learn about a single species of plant or animal and what it does and what its natural history is and its biology is. But actually, when you start to delve into that and start to join the dots and see how everything is so intricately linked. And actually, the difficult part is seeing how we've sort of started pulling elements out or putting pressure on certain elements, and then all of those chains and webs and complex
Mm.
relationships start to fall apart. That's when it gets really interesting, and you start to see the damage that we can do.
And it starts very much from the bottom. I've just finished a little while ago Dave Goulson's book Silent Earth,
Yeah,
and very much about that insect apocalypse, how
yeah,
insects are crashing, but how with little things that we can start bringing them back again. And then how that affects the birds. If the insects aren't there, suddenly you're seeing birds like house sparrows
yeah,
diminishing. One of my sort of key facts is I remember listening to sparrows when I was a little boy outside my window on a very busy road in Liverpool. Actually wanted to become a vet because one of my friends had accidentally killed a sparrow while we were playing in the playground. And then 50 years later, there's 50 million less sparrows in the country than there were in the 60s and early 70s. So we're in really sort of troubling times. But I know, you were also at COP26. I mean, perhaps tell us a little bit about the journey before that. Obviously, you're a vet like myself, with a love of animals. You've done some fabulous webinars for us, both on pet nutrition, but also you have that love of exotics as well. Perhaps tell us a little bit about that, and then we'll talk a bit about COP26 and how you found that and how you got there as well, which
sure,
was
yeah.
fascinating.
Yeah, it's a bit of a convoluted journey, I suppose. It starts really with the fact that I was a lifelong naturalist, I suppose, and then started getting more into kind of conservation on a very local level. Even as a teenager growing up, getting involved with local bird group and local nature groups and things, and just being again fascinated by being outdoors in nature and discovering what it had to offer. And so I would say I kind of was a biologist and naturalist before I just said, what job do I want? What career do I
Mm.
want? I want to be a vet. Being a vet was kind of one of the few jobs I knew of that could involve animals and biology and science combined. Had a lot of pets growing up. Won't bore everyone with the details. We all have similar stories as vets, I think, in how we got in there. But I did my undergrad degree in animal science and did veterinary as a graduate in Dublin. And the animal science degree kind of gave me a really broad experience of kind of evolutionary biology, anatomy, and physiology. Um, and I was fascinated by kind of anatomy of a wide range of species and how those species basically were ultimately adapted to their ecological niche and their biology and natural history. That side of things really fascinated me. And then in the later years, studying kind of ecology and habitat and conservation management and things, again, seeing kind of joining those dots of how the individual species in an ecosystem all join up and all are connected. So it kind of came out of my veterinary degree with fairly broad knowledge of how animals work, both in the
Yeah.
kind of pet and livestock and kind of human realm, but really how animals work in the wild realm as well. And to be honest, you know the story, but I got increasingly frustrated in a clinical setting. I was doing domestic and exotic pets in private practice, and did that for about 6 years, and really loved exotics because it kind of catered to my like of the weird and unusual and smaller interesting things like reptiles and amphibians and birds that I was really fascinated with as a kid. But I got increasingly frustrated with actually the issue of keeping these pets, many
Yeah.
of them essentially wild animals, in suboptimal conditions in captivity for human entertainment. And a lot of the problems that we got with them were entirely avoidable by improving their nutrition or their captive husbandry. And I got really frustrated with just, talking to owners over and over again about why temperature is important for your pet reptile, or why, this diet is not a balanced diet for X, Y, or Z species. So, kind of got a little bit frustrated, got a little bit burnt out in clinical practice after 6 years. Again, a familiar story to many of your listeners, I'm sure. But I decided to take some time back, and actually, before I went into a veterinary industry role, believe it or not, I started up a garden design business, or rejuvenated a garden design business, because
Mm.
I worked in a garden center as a kid. I worked while I was doing my animal science degree with a lot of my horticulture friends in the summers and things, doing landscaping and garden maintenance. And then when I was in vet school, I had my own garden design and maintenance business for, the beer money,
Yeah. The
Anthony. So
entrepreneurial
I
spirit is strong with this one.
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, fingers in many pies all along. But I just wanted to break completely from the veterinary space for a while and get outdoors and get my hands in the earth again and start working with plants and start talking to people about how we could garden in a more friendly way for the planet and more friendly way for biodiversity. And that break actually did me the world of good, because it really clarified for me where I wanted to be and what I wanted to do with my time
Yeah.
and energy. And it wasn't about, no offense to anyone else who it is about, but it wasn't about pampered pets, you
Mm.
know, in Richmond, in Surrey. And it wasn't
Yeah.
about, dealing with exotic species in small tanks that I was just, despairing at because I was getting nowhere. I was firefighting rather than actually
Mm.
solving the issues. It was really about taking a broader look at, again, our planet health, and particularly kind of wild animals and ecosystems and how it could help there. So,
I think we've got a really important role to play in that whole area of conservation and sustainability, because if we as vets don't embrace that, who is going to lead it? I think it's really important that we're seen as leaders in this whole field of, ecology and climate action.
yeah, I mean, if you think about One Health, you know what I mean? A lot of human medics, have not fully embraced the concept of One Health, but One
Mm.
Health is about human health, animal health, and environmental health. And I think as
Yeah.
vets, we are dealing with the kind of confluence of all three of those things. I don't think there's a better profession really to be leading on global One
Yeah.
Health. So, we're in an amazing position, and we have, a lot of knowledge and a lot of know-how on how to tackle those three things together. We're often doing it at a micro scale, in our daily practice, but doing it at a macro scale, I think we have a really important kind of place at the table as
Mm.
well.
We have a lovely Costa Rican vet works with us called Theo, and she was over the last week, and it really brought back memories of when I was in Costa Rica about 15 years ago. When you see five scarlet macaws flying across the forest clearing, and then find them or find one in a small aviary on its own. You cannot give that bird what it needs in that setting, can you?
No, no. I've seen it myself. I've been to Australia and seen, cockatoos flying in flocks of 20
Yeah,
and 30 birds. And just thinking about the patients I had and was treating and trying to get them over the psychological issue of feather
yeah,
plucking and frustration
yeah.
behaviors in a small cage in someone's living room for 60, 70 years. It's like actually it made me examine my
Impossible.
conscience and what I'm
Yeah,
contributing to and what I'm potentially glamorizing. On Twitter, my old handle was Exotic Pet Vet. And I just found
yeah,
actually by showcasing all of these interesting and amazing cases and species I'm dealing with, am I just glamorizing, the
yeah.
micro scale of exotic pets and how we interact with them?
And there's obviously some pets that I think, exotic pets can be kept well.
Yeah.
But, it's like with the rabbit, sometimes people get it as the first child's pet. I mean,
Hmm.
a rabbit is a complicated creature to keep well. A cat is much easier. We've had a cat that's adopted us during the pandemic. His needs are actually very small. You
Yeah.
feed him, he occasionally jumps on your lap for a cuddle, but it's a very short cuddle. He can kind of look after himself compared with a rabbit, which is you need to keep a very close watch on a rabbit, don't you?
Yeah. Well, first things first, you shouldn't have a rabbit.
You couldn't have
They're a
one rabbit,
social
you could have
species.
two rabbits. Yes, of course.
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, yeah, we're getting it wrong with a lot of pets, unfortunately.
Yeah,
But yeah, and look, not to say that you can't keep certain pets very, very well, but I
mm,
think a lot of the time, what I was dealing with in practice was pets being kept suboptimally, and it got to me over time. And I thought I want to do bigger picture stuff, so I
yeah,
I moved into
exactly.
industry, and at the same time, I for the first time ever had some time on my hands, and I decided to set up a local wildlife conservation group where I live in London, and that's grown
Yeah.
into something much bigger than I anticipated.
We will talk about that in a minute because that is an exciting story. But obviously, COP26, I went to it. I mean, you'll be pleased to know, Sean, I didn't fly up in my private jet,
Good
which was
stuff.
a start, or fly
You
to.
left that at home that day, yeah.
I let the Prime Minister borrow it for the day, so he
That
could
was
fly
good of
it.
you.
My
Yeah,
private jet.
yeah.
I always
Patriotic.
think actions speak louder than words. So, being the president of the COP26, it probably meant he should have used a train. But we will move on. We don't want to make it too political. And
No,
I went up on train. That's pretty carbon neutral. I mean, it's pretty good going up on a train. But you went one better. You actually sailed up there. Tell us about that story.
I did. I sailed up to
And got quite
COP26.
sick, I think, as well, didn't you? You're not the best sailor necessarily. I think, if I remember correctly.
Well, I highlighted the first trip, which was in seas that we probably shouldn't have undertaken the first leg of the trip. And so, yes, I did vomit off the side of the boat, but generally I was pretty good. So I
Yeah,
think 3 out of 6 of us on the boat gave something to the sea. Let's put it
yeah.
that way
Oh,
on that
yeah.
leg. Yeah, yeah. But no, that was an interesting project, and it's hopefully going to come out as a documentary in the near future. Fingers crossed, there'll be some news on that soon. But basically, myself and another vet, Dr. Paul Ramos, I'm not sure if you're aware of him.
Yeah.
He has done some television work with Nat Geo Wild and Animal Planet, and a producer he knew was interested in putting something together. And he's American, but has lived a lot of his life in Australia. And he asked me to come along because he didn't know much about British wildlife and British ocean health and things. But basically, what we wanted to do was put together a documentary, but also bring the message of ocean health to COP26, because believe it or not, it wasn't on the main agenda. And
Mm,
when the ocean is producing, over half of our oxygen and absorbing a lot of carbon and keeping the temperature of the planet stable and things, and has huge amount of biodiversity, we were kind of left scratching our heads as to why it wasn't on the main agenda at COP26. So we decided to undertake a challenge sailing from Cornwall up to Scotland to COP26. And we were set another challenge within that by Dr. Steve Simpson from the University of Bristol, who is a marine biologist and studying the effects of climate change on kind of our ocean ecosystems. And he set us a challenge to record the longest kind of country length underwater sound transect. So we were making sound recordings under the ocean on the entire trip up. and kind of looking at what species were in British waters.
Mm.
And one of the fascinating things we found was a little tiny species of shrimp called a snapping shrimp. It's about the size of your little finger. It's got one massive big claw, and it uses it to kind of punch an air bubble and stun its prey. And it's a very distinctive sound on a hydrophone when you hear it. It's almost
Mm.
like crackling bacon. You just hear this snaps, crackle, and pop kind of
Yeah.
bacon sizzling sound.
Yeah.
And he thought that it's a Mediterranean shrimp species. He thought maybe it's reached, southern waters of Britain 10 years ago. It might be as far as mid Wales by this stage, but we actually found that shrimp had made its way all the way up to the Inner Hebrides. Off the
Mm.
west coast of Scotland. And then common dolphins, which were also a southerly species historically of fairly warm water, they had reached the Hebrides as well, and were now the most common cetacean whaler dolphin species spotted in the Hebrides, from zero in the year 2000 to over 2000 last year. So we're seeing that actual temperature shift and ecosystem shift of warm water species northwards,
Mm.
which means a lot of the cold water species are going to be struggling, being pushed northward as well into
Yes.
kind of narrower bands. So
Mm.
we did a lot with that, and we produced a audio music track using all the recordings we had
Mm.
got, and we released it on Spotify, and we managed to get it played into the blue zone to the world's leaders at COP26, which was a great finale for a fairly challenging month on a boat with five guys. And I learned the meaning of cabin fever, let's put it that way.
No, that was brilliant, and I think you're right. COP26 obviously was there's another COP going on at the moment, which is more around biodiversity. But I think there is my concern worry is that we become obsessed with carbon and don't think about biodiversity. And if we don't marry the two things up and think about them holistically, we'll probably get it wrong. Because as you say, things like the seagrasses can actually hold a lot of carbon as well, and then are
Yeah.
really important for things like seahorses and so on. So it is so important that we have a holistic approach to this, because otherwise we start planting trees in all the wrong places, and none of the animals will go into those forests, will they?
Absolutely. I think like the biodiversity crisis is just as important, but I often describe it as, the kind of poorer cousin of the climate crisis and and carbon emissions and things. We get obsessed with that because it's measurable. Tree planting has almost become this, sexy solution to our planet's crisis. And actually woodland cover, we believe it or not, we don't need to plant trees for woodland cover to happen where it's meant to happen. Trees will kind of plant themselves. We need regeneration of landscapes. We need
Yeah.
to allow landscapes to restore themselves, and actually going out and doing mass tree planting on, sensitive grassland habitats is the last thing we should be doing.
Mm.
So the whole trees and carbon offsetting world has become a little bit kind of commercial and capitalistic within itself, and it's got some flaws. Actually, as you say, things like seagrass meadows, natural grasslands, freshwater wetland systems as well capture a lot more carbon than woodland cover or closed woodland canopy does. So I think we need to think outside the box, but also, as you say, marry up the two. The climate crisis and the carbon crisis is one
Mm.
thing, but biodiversity is in free fall, for the last few
Yes.
decades. And 1 in 7 species of plant or animal in the UK is now facing extinction. How incredible is that? Incredibly
Mm.
depressing, but 1 in 7 species now is threatened with extinction. It's actually unbelievable. But most people don't really connect with that, or don't really know what to do about that, I
Mm.
suppose.
What's really interesting, we have Lunt by us, which is a Lancashire Wildlife Trust reserve, and it is beautiful. It's like a little paradise. Uh, Obviously, a wetland. Obviously, doing all those great things, but also during the big storm that we had, the banks of the river broke, and we probably would have ended up with a huge flood in Maghull, which is one of the suburbs on the north of Liverpool. But this actually protected Maghull. So again, it's a holistic example of we're doing it for the wetlands, for the carbon, for the animals. But actually, one health wise, it's also stopped us potentially loss of human life, but certainly damage to property as well. So it is all
Yeah, and
connected
that's
again, isn't it?
yeah, it's totally connected, and that's a good example of nature-based solutions. There's a lot of
Mm.
buzzwords flying around, but some of them are really important and need to get into the kind of public vernacular of what they mean and kind of how to do them. So, wetland creation, especially urban wetland creation, now is going to make our urban centers a lot more resilient to climate change and to flood risk and things like that, because they're going to hold back, not only hold back and slow down flood waters, but also sink carbon and cool the air and things like that. So and
Mhm.
provide a haven for biodiversity as well. Everything is interlinked, but nature-based solutions is something that I think our government really needs to get their head around and employ a little bit better and build into legislation and planning of how we progress.
I was very lucky in, I think it was 2012, to go to Vancouver for the World Congress of Vet Derm, and they have a park in Vancouver called Stanley Park, which
I know
actually,
it well. Yeah.
where I was brought up, was also Stanley Park between the two football grounds in
Okay.
Anfield. So there was a, but what Stanley Park in Anfield doesn't have, it, although it has beautiful great crested grebes and some really exciting stuff, which I suppose the football fans, as they're walking past, plus it's also had a new wildflower meadow planted, so it is a fantastic place. But people won't necessarily recognise that if they're not open to it. But what it didn't have, which Stanley Park had in Vancouver, and I actually saw one, was a beaver.
Oh
So a
yeah.
nice little beaver swam past in Stanley Park, and of course, beavers are such fabulous creatures. All the good work that they do, and I'm sure people have heard about the Yellowstone story and things. Um, but tell us your exciting news. We're perhaps going a bit early to press, but there is potentially exciting news from West London, isn't there?
There is, yeah, yeah. We have great beaver-shaped plans, basically. So I run Ealing Wildlife Group, and we started as a very kind of grassroots, volunteer-led, kind of small-scale conservation group. But we've grown quite a lot, and we've grown in our aspirations as well. And one of the things we did last year was we reintroduced Britain's smallest rodent back to Ealing. We think it's been extinct since the 1980s, which is the harvest mouse, that little cute mouse that you often see in photos, on an ear of corn or barley or
Yes.
something.
Yeah.
And then we said, right, we're reintroducing Britain's smallest rodent. We actually want to reintroduce Britain's largest native rodent as well, which has been extinct for over 400 years, which is the Eurasian beaver. So we actually we don't have news on that yet, but we have submitted our license application to Natural England to do that, and it would be a 5-year enclosed trial to see what kind of effects beavers can have as ecosystem engineers and as nature-based solutions, really in the urban context. So it'll be the first time that we've
Yeah.
this has been done in like truly urban context, and the main aims of it are to look at flood mitigation. So, like you said, with that wetland near you, holding back water and storing water in times of flood and releasing it slowly. Beavers do the same. They slow the flow through a landscape by damming it up and almost the landscape around them acting as a sponge for flood waters.
Mhm.
The second thing is we want to see how urban communities will interact with nature-based solutions and beavers in the urban context, and learn how we can mitigate some of the damage that beavers can do,
Mhm.
tree protection and things like that, which is very easy. And a lot of cities already have beavers. Vancouver, Berlin, Munich, Perth in Scotland, has wild,
Mhm.
free living beavers. And the third thing we want to do is see what the biodiversity benefits will be of bringing beavers back, because it's been shown over and over again that they do provide habitat for lots and lots
Mhm.
of other things as well. So really, really exciting. And the unique thing about this project that we've kind of put together is that it will be the first time it's an immersive experience for the public. It's part of the Capital Ring. So pedestrians and cyclists will be able to walk through the beaver landscape. It's about 10 hectares in total, and they'll be able to see, with no fences around them, what
Mhm.
beavers are doing, and hopefully there'll be massive educational potential there. So it's down to Natural England now. The deadline actually to hear back from them is this Friday, so we're waiting. Hotly anticipated email coming our way,
Mm,
hopefully. And if they say no, we will really want to have a very, very good reason and rationale why they say no,
mm.
because there's been lots of enclosures done. We think ours is unique because it's actually looking at beavers coming back into our cities, and that's an inevitability. Beavers are out there now living in Britain again, which is fantastic. It's only a matter of time before they start to encroach on cities, and we need to learn to live alongside them. So why
Yeah.
not try that in a controlled way first,
Well,
and then
a
see how we
scientific
go.
experiment, so to speak, where we can get really great data from it. I know very close to them when I was traveling last year. I think it's the River Otter, isn't it, down in Dorset
Down
or
in Devon,
Devon,
yeah,
where they
yeah,
are, and all the work there seems to have been really positive, doesn't it? That there's only really positives. I know. Going back to the tree thing, one of the big problems for the trees is our plague of deer, which of course we don't have an apex predator apart from ourselves to control deer. So
that's
I
right.
suspect deer do a lot more damage to trees than the odd beaver would do.
Yeah, the thing with beavers is, and our trees, beavers have only been gone from the landscape for a few hundred years, and that's a blink of an eye in evolutionary
Yeah,
terms. But they've evolved alongside our trees for millions of years. So, our trees are all designed, and the beaver's favorite tree species are the ones that are absolutely designed to withstand coppicing to the
yes,
ground. So things like willow, alder, birch, they get coppice to the ground on their main stem, and they throw up more again. And what happens is the beavers create kind of a succession of different age vegetation structures, and that's what brings in the biodiversity. They're kind of
brings
described
in
as
the
a
nightingales
biodiversity
and
magic
so on.
pill because they introduce,
Yeah,
kind of varied structures in the landscape. And our
yeah,
trees do fine without them. The problem with, the massive tens of thousands of excess deer in the landscape is they don't allow any of the saplings to regenerate or
yeah,
any of the trees to regenerate. And you get this bare, denuded land, the uplands of Scotland and things like that. We see them as normal because it's shifting baseline syndrome. It's just what we've always thought of as upland Scotland to look like, but actually where they've sectioned out areas and excluded deer, or they're applying high culling pressure on deer, we're seeing regeneration of what
yeah.
Scottish Caledonian forests should be now in their infancy again, and the associated burst of biodiversity that happens when we allow that natural process to take place again. So yeah, I think bringing back the lynx, bringing back wolves, they're controversial concepts in rewilding, but we're great in this country at telling other countries what they should do to manage their wildlife, but actually we're one of the most nature depleted countries in the world. And actually, if we can't live alongside lynx and wolves, then actually, can we really talk to other countries about what they're doing with their wildlife? I don't know.
No, I absolutely agree, and I think it's an interesting concept that Benedict MacDonald talked about in the
Mm,
Rebedding book. Very much, people are now used to not seeing many sparrows, whereas 50 years ago, when I was growing up, there were many more sparrows in the environment, and probably if had I gone back another 100 years, there would have been even more sparrows. So that, and the world's changed, hasn't it? We
mm.
obviously we developed agriculture, so each generation is different, but we have to start thinking about systems that will allow us to feed everybody, but at the same time, it's good quality meat rather than the sort of factory farm stuff that isn't necessarily that healthy for us either.
Yeah, and less meat and more kind of regenerative agricultural
Yeah,
practices that build soil and take care of our soil, which is the
exactly.
base of every food chain. Also, like the example of that shifting baseline that everyone will identify with, that when you say it, you're like, oh yeah, that's true, whatever age you are. If you think about the insects on your windscreen when you were a kid,
Yeah,
if you were going in a car journey, you'd be wiping them off. You'd be hearing them thud, thud, thud on
mm,
the windscreen and the headlamps, especially at night time, and you'd have to wipe it down when you got home. Nowadays, you get home from an hour's drive in the countryside and there's barely a mark on your windscreen.
yeah,
So we've actually caused this huge, colossal decline, like Dave Golson describes as the insect apocalypse. And once we've taken out that base layer of the food chain, everything else further up collapses and our ecosystem suffers for it. So it's hard sometimes to explain that link to people of, what if we have fewer mosquitoes or fewer
yeah,
ladybirds or fewer of some obscure solitary bee? We might not know the impact of that, but the rate we're damaging those little tiny things is actually causing a cumulative effect over time. And our climate and our environments are getting less resilient as a result.
And the insecticides we now produce, very tiny amounts will kill, large numbers
Huge,
of
huge
insects.
numbers.
Whereas, we went back to the 60s, there was DDT, but, there are much more sophisticated insecticides now, and, we have to obviously manage those. I think,
And there's something, Anthony, as vets, something that's come up in the last couple of years, research studies
yeah,
on some of the chemicals that we prescribe as vets, which is a real
yeah,
conflict.
exactly.
Our pet parasiticides like fipronil and imidacloprid, you know, those in tiny quantities have the potential to wipe out massive amounts of
Mm,
insects and invertebrates. And if you look at fipronil itself, they did a study on rivers, I think it was 2020, and they found that there was fipronil residues in 98% of UK rivers that they
mm,
surveyed, and it's one of the breakdown compounds of that called fipronil sulfone, I believe. That was found at something like 38 times higher the recommended safety limit for the environment.
mm,
And that's due to our pets, our dogs mainly going into rivers and that wash off effect, or a wash off effect down the drain and into our waterways that way. But, even us as vets, we're directly prescribing some
yeah,
insecticidal compounds that are banned for agricultural use because of their detrimental effects on the food chain. And we're recommending putting it on our pets on a monthly basis prophylactically where it does have an impact in the environment. So hard, I'm not in clinics anymore, and I do
mm,
understand the pressure of making sure our clients don't have a flea infestation by
mm,
prophylactic treatment. And I understand as well, let's be honest, the bottom line and the revenue generation that we need to
mm,
keep vet practices alive and open and profitable. Some of that is, monthly treatments. But as vets, and if we're really truly One Health practitioners, we need to examine what we're doing there and are there
yeah.
better ways.
Exactly. I mean, obviously I did dermatology, so I prescribed a lot of flea treatments in my time. I think, we need to get very clear about that. And this is why I think bringing the profession together to discuss these issues, to make sure that if it is harmful, we stop doing it, or we change the way we prescribe in a much more targeted way, on an as and when necessary basis. So,
Mhm.
I think it's really satisfying to see that discussion is starting to develop, and hopefully it will
Yeah.
develop more over the next year or two. To finish off, Sean, obviously, your day job, which we all know you as one of the vets at Tails, fascinating company, very much that personalised medicine, personalised food approach. But again, I suppose we need to look at the effects that pet food has as well.
Yeah.
Every pet. I got adopted by a cat over the pandemic, and one of my good friends, Chantel Bramwood, runs Eco Offset. So I've offset my cat, or I can't even say he's my cat. I mean, I'm a member of
Yeah.
staff for the cat. But also my sister's dog, I offset it for a present for her. What's your thoughts
Right.
on how the pet food industry can become a real part of the sustainability story?
Yeah, I have lots of thoughts on this. This could be a whole other webinar, Anthony. But I think briefly, yeah, we need to recognize as vets, I think we need to recognize the luxury, I suppose, Western luxury of pet ownership, and
Mm,
especially how much we indulge our pets and how much our pets consume. They have what's called a carbon paw print rather than carbon footprint. We often have multiple pets. We do often lavish them with goods and consumables and energy and things. So there is um, an onus on us as vets, I suppose, to kind of bring up how to be more sustainable in terms of pet
yeah.
ownership. Pet food is a big one. It's a very big topic and sometimes contentious topic in terms of sustainability. And just to put it out there as conflict of interest, at tails.com we produce cooked, dry and wet food and treats ranges. We don't currently produce any vegan or vegetarian diet, or whole diets at least. We don't produce raw food, and we don't produce insect protein food, which are
Mm,
some of the trends, arguably fads in terms of pet food. Um, We are working towards B Corp at tails.com.
Mm.
And one of the things there is our kind of environmental impact, obviously. And um, I think a lot of people focus on pet foods in terms of their sourcing of ingredients or their packaging. Is it recyclable and things like that? The biggest, we've looked into this in detail and examined the kind of science on it. The biggest thing that we can do to reduce the carbon footprint or ecological footprint of our food that we produce for pets is the type of ingredients we use and where we get it from. And I think there's huge trend in pet food marketing and the pet owning community to be over humanizing our pets or misunderstanding what they actually need in terms of nutrition and going, I only want high meat content or human grade meat or only breast tissue,
Mm.
or the choice cuts because my dog is very important to me
Yeah,
and I wouldn't feed them off cuts or scrap
yeah.
or organs or whatever. And that's driven a lot by, certain trends in pet food like raw feeding, vilifying traditional cooked pet food brands that have been around a long time, vilifying meat and animal byproducts or animal derivatives, whatever way you want to say it, but at the same time feeding those exact same things in raw form to
Mm.
dogs and claiming that that's magically beneficial and that's what we should be feeding. So there's a lot of confusing messaging out there in terms of pet food, but we adopt a nose to tail approach. And this is where also some of the arguments of like vegan and vegetarian diets for pets falls down because it claims to replace all of the meat or animal products that our pets consume as a like for like comparison, when in fact, most of the meat and animal products traditionally that we've fed to our pets are the parts of the carcass that we don't eat as humans. They are from human grade animals. They've come off the human food chain, and they're delicious. They're nutritious. They're biologically appropriate because our pets in their ancestry would have eaten whole prey and every part of it that we
Mm.
don't necessarily eat nowadays. So this kind of flawed logic that you know um, animal byproducts, which is just a legal labeling term for byproducts of the human food chain, are somehow harmful or somehow junk food for our pets, is completely biological nonsense. So actually, the biggest thing we should be doing is taking that waste product from the human food chain and feeding it to our pets because it should be used. It shouldn't be going into
Well,
landfill. It shouldn't be
it
wasted.
prevents waste, doesn't it? It prevents waste.
Exactly. That's the biggest thing in terms of carbon
Mm.
impact of our pets. And then think there are exciting things coming out like insect protein, which has a massively lower carbon footprint if produced correctly, lower
Yes.
water usage, lower carbon emissions. But at the moment, it's in its infancy in terms of producing it at scale and at a kind of affordable cost. It's very pricey. It's
Yeah.
imported from the Netherlands now for any kind of UK
Yes.
brands that are using insect protein. So we're again, it's really good. We're having these conversations. The industry is having to keep up with being held to account and things, but there's a lot of kind of fads and misconceptions and marketing stuff, kind of convincing people that this is the
Mm.
way to go if you want to feed your pet more sustainably. Actually, I think nose to tail approach and feeding a biologically appropriate, balanced diet to our pets can happen in lots of different ways. It doesn't have to be kind of the extremes of like just feeding them raw meat or feeding them, high protein content that they
Mm.
don't actually need. But vegan, vegetarian stuff, that has problems as well with monocultures
Mm.
and
Well,
sprays and
soya
being
as well.
detrimental.
Yeah.
Exactly, exactly. So yeah, there's a lot of
I
good
think
good
it's,
buzzwords out there and things, but
yeah.
a lot of it is marketing rather than kind of evidence based.
For me, it's also, it's as you say, it's the provenance, because if you're producing pet food from, perhaps, I'm bringing that meat over from Brazil, and that meat is being grown by soya, which has been produced on Amazon rainforest that's
Cleared
been cleared,
rainforest.
then clearly that is not good. Whereas if you're producing that meat in a way that's much more sustainable, then
Yeah.
clearly that. And I think this is where it's very difficult on a bag to put all of that down. But as part of hopefully your successful application for B Corp, they're the sort of discussions that I'm sure you're having at the moment, aren't they?
Yeah. Yeah, it's sourcing your ingredients as locally as possible,
Yeah,
utilizing them in a non-wasteful way,
yeah,
and producing food that is, balanced, nutritious, complete,
yeah.
using, having the least carbon footprint as you can.
And 30% of all food is wasted, and that's a kind of
Yeah.
criminal thing. If we can cut down on that, as you say, we're putting less into landfill, and then also for any factory-based business, how you're producing your energy. Do you have solar panels? Are you getting sustainable energy from
Yeah.
a good energy or a ecotricity type producer?
Yeah, yeah, and that's something as vets that we can do in any area that we work in. If we're
Yeah,
practice owners, changing energy suppliers and trying to be more eco-friendly and kind of having a position on this, whatever area of industry or practice you're in, having
yeah,
a position on this and influencing not only your clients but also your team and your staff and things as well, and
yeah.
putting that sustainability message at the core of what you do. If anyone listening hasn't heard of Vet Sustain, I'm sure they have to listen to this podcast. But
Mm,
Vet Sustain have produced a really great kind of checklist of, being a greener practice, and
yeah.
kind of how to implement small changes to become accredited as an environmentally conscious practice.
It's been great also to see so many people in the veterinary profession embracing investors in the environment as an
Yeah,
accreditation scheme. Obviously, Big Core is fantastic. We're actually one of the few green accredited businesses. But it's
great.
actually, it isn't difficult to get to the bronze or silver level. It just needs that sort of commitment from the top, if you like, but also you need that involvement from everybody. The more, as you say, you can get a team involved, the better, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
Sean, it's been great to speak to you. I suppose as a final thing, are the adders still out, or are they well and truly in the undergrowth now?
The adders are hidden away now. The
Yes.
growth is too lush. We keep missing the
I
opportunity to
keep
see
on
them, Anthony. I keep
threatening
saying to
to say
come
to
down.
come down, yeah. But maybe
Yeah, there's a
maybe next year with the beavers.
we've got a short window of adders emerging from hibernation and the grass getting too long to
Yeah.
see them, and they're busy, preoccupied with finding a mate rather than avoiding us. So,
Yes.
if you come down March to April next year, I'll guarantee to show you some urban adders.
Fantastic. We did have a moment last month. One of our friends had come for dinner, and I told her we get a lot of hedgehogs in the front garden. It's a very small garden, an urban garden, but I obviously encourage wildlife into the garden. And as she was walking out, I said, "No, hold on. I will check to see if there's a hedgehog in the garden." As I opened the door, one hedgehog was running up the path, closely followed by another one. We ended up with about 20 minutes of hedgehogs mating, which I don't think many people see. As they say, how do hedgehogs mate? Carefully, but we've
Carefully.
got a we've got a much better example now. And Sean, if you're very lucky, you might even get a little video from me after the podcast.
Brilliant. It's quite a vocal affair, I
Yes,
believe, is it?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's lots of things going on. Sean,
Yeah.
as always, it's great to speak to you. Thank you so much for everything that you're doing for the environment. And yeah, I'm sure we'll be speaking again very soon. Take care.
Cool. Thanks for having me on, Anthony.